Okay, it looks like I was muted, and so I'm going to back up here one slide. Sorry about that. Welcome to today's webinar. The title of today's webinar is Small Movements in LSVT Big. Can Big Help My Small? And today the focus of our webinar is really going to be on talking to you about fine motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease, how those can be impacted, and how LSVT Big can help. This webinar is brought to you by LSVT Global. My name is Laura Gousset. I'm one of the LSVT Big Training and Certification faculty, and I'm a physical therapist. I'm delighted to be joined today by Bernie Kozer, one of our occupational therapists, and also one of our LSVT Big Training and Certification faculty. So briefly, I'm going to go over the logistics for today's webinar. First of all, if you haven't joined one of our webinars in the past, please know that your questions are welcome. Throughout the webinar, we'll take time for questions, especially at the end of the webinar. But today, if you want to start typing your questions anytime, you sure can. There's a little question control box. Just open that up and you can type your question. And when we have time to ask that question, we will do that. Right now, your microphones are automatically muted so that it eliminates the background noise from all of the different environments from which you might be joining us. If you choose to ask a question out loud, you can click on your hand icon and we'll see that your hand is raised. And as soon as we'll be able to get to your question, we'll let you know that your microphone has been unmuted so that you can ask your question out loud. So let's really get into the heart of the webinar for today. Briefly, here are instructor biographies. Bernie Kozer has been an occupational therapist for over 30 years and is now in a managerial role at Residential Home Health in Michigan and is currently the Director of Therapy Services. Bernie is a very strong user and supporter of LSVT BIG, both personally and in residential home health teams all over Michigan and other places as well. I myself am a physical therapist and have been utilizing LSVT BIG since I was certified in that since 2009. I'm one of the faculty members and now serve as the Chief Clinical Officer for LSVT BIG. Some information for you in case you are a physical therapy or occupational therapy professional who is joining us today. Just a few notes regarding CE credit. It is not state registered or pre-approved for CEUs, but it may be used for self-reported CEU credit as a non-registered CEU. If you would like to report your activity, email webinars@lsvtglobal.com to request a certificate after this webinar is done, and we'll include your name, date, and duration of the webinar. You must attend for the full hour to earn one of these CE certificates. Licensing requirements do vary greatly from state to state, so please do check with your state licensing board to determine if your state accepts non-state registered CEU activities. Okay, some brief disclosures. Both Bernie and I have a non-financial relationship with LSVT Global, including a preference for LSVT BIG as a treatment technique. We both receive lecture honorarium and consulting fees, and I myself am an employee of LSVT Global. Here are our learning objectives for today's webinar. By the end of the webinar, we want you to be able to give examples of fine motor tasks and how those are impacted in Parkinson's disease. Describe how LSVT BIG is used to address difficulties with fine motor control in Parkinson's disease. Identify some specific fine motor tasks that you or someone you know would like to improve, and list at least 3 ways that you can learn more about LSVT BIG or find a clinician. So to start off, fine motor tasks, really, what are they? What do we mean? It's a common term in the physical therapy and occupational therapy world or medical world, but if you are a person with Parkinson's, that word or phrase might not be as familiar to you. So basically, this is taken from Jara Zabeska, that they are tasks which require precise manipulations of the hands and fingers. You need steadiness, coordination, muscle control, proprioception, and sensation to make accurate and discrete finger movements. And I'm sure you can think of many, many examples, but some common ones just to get you started thinking on the right track would be buttoning, handwriting, typing, tying your shoes, putting in earrings if you have those, fastening some sort of a clasp, especially small ones, picking up small objects or grasping objects. So these things are very commonly impacted in Parkinson's disease. And in fact, 75% of people with Parkinson's disease have micrographia, which is smallness of handwriting. Okay, so just know that even small movements in Parkinson's disease can become too small. So you think of the very fine motor control that's needed for handwriting or clasping a necklace. Those movements actually, if we could scale them and see them, we would see that they become very, very tiny. So I'm going to launch a couple of polling questions. The first one is this, and you'll have the opportunity to answer it live here in just a second. If you have Parkinson's, have you experienced difficulties or changes in your fine motor function? And so I'm going to launch this poll here, and I'll give you about 15 seconds to answer it. I'll give you just a few more seconds here to cast your vote. Okay, so if you take a look at that data, it says that about 78% of you said yes, which is really interesting because that totally falls in line with the 75% of people with Parkinson's experience micrographia. So thank you for answering that short question. What are the causes of fine motor control issues in Parkinson's disease? Unfortunately, it's not a simple answer to provide you. Some of the newer literature is saying that the primary problem is not so much bradykinesia, which are slow movements, but more what's called limb kinetic apraxia. So this really has to do more of the coordination. And if you look at the definition by Foke, it says loss of deftness. So I think of deftness, I think of coordination, with a decrease in the ability to correctly perform independent but coordinated finger movements. It's a processing deficit, possibly due to a change in the interplay between the basal ganglia and the supplementary motor area of the cortex. And you think of the basal ganglia as being the primary area of the brain that's impacted as the result of Parkinson's disease. But that basal ganglia interconnects with many different areas in the brain in a very fine-tuned and coordinated way. The difficult thing with this limb kinetic apraxia is it's not responsive to dopaminergic therapy. So if you take something like Sinemet, it typically doesn't help that fine motor coordination of the fingers, although it might help the bradykinesia or the slowness of movements. Tremor can also definitely impact fine motor control in people with Parkinson's disease. And the last thing that we find is that people with Parkinson's disease can develop reduced hand strength over time. Now, that is amenable to strengthening. However, we'll see the impact that strengthening does or does not have on handwriting in just a few slides here. So there are 3 key studies on fine motor training as a treatment in Parkinson's disease. And I just wanted to highlight some of those findings with you. Overall, we'd say that there's a great paucity of research when it comes to strategies or therapy treatments or exercise-based interventions that truly have been found to be helpful for people struggling with fine motor control issues in Parkinson's disease. One of these is from Tim Van Belleghem and his colleagues, and the title was Home-Based Training for dexterity in Parkinson's disease. So it was a very nice randomized control trial with over 100 subjects published in Parkinsonism and related disorders. They had two treatment groups, a home-based dexterity group where they were specifically fine motor exercises versus a TheraBand program that was targeted more at resistance training or building strength. So the dosage was 5 times a week for 4 weeks, 30-minute sessions, which we would consider quite intensive. Only the home dexterity group improved in dexterity-related activities of daily living, and the 9-hole peg test, which is also a measure, so to speak, of fine motor control, whereas the TheraBand strengthening group did not improve in those measures at all. Unfortunately, the effects did not sustain. They were not lasting, speaking to the matter that if you want to improve something through task-specific training, that's very important, but it's also equally important to continue practicing those exercises over time to maintain those treatment effects. The second study was from Bryant, published in 2018 in the Journal of Hand Therapy, and this was a small study. It was a feasibility study, and they wanted to look at the effect of hand resistance exercise on handwriting in people with Parkinson's disease and essential tremor. So in this study, 9 people had Parkinson's disease and 9 people had essential tremor. They had home-based hand and arm resistance exercises that the subjects did 3 times a week for 6 weeks. And they found that the grip strength did improve in people with Parkinson's disease, but it did not improve with those who had essential tremor. Unfortunately, it did not translate to improvements in handwriting, even though their hand strength had improved. The last of these studies that I'll highlight briefly was from Oliveira and colleagues, published in the Journal of Neurology, Neurosurgery, and Psychiatry in '97. So a bit older study, but I thought pertinent to what we'll be discussing today. The title was Micrographia and Parkinson's Disease, the Effect of Providing External Cues. And so they looked at 11 people with Parkinson's and 14 healthy controls, and stimulated them by either giving them targets so that they would have to make their letters large and hit the targets, or dots, so connect dot to dot when you're making the letters, or they gave them continuous auditory cues to help them to remember to keep their size of their letters and their handwriting big. And what they found is that both the visual and the auditory cues did improve the amplitude of handwriting in people with Parkinson's. And so it could be cued, and the cueing of amplitude seemed to be effective in this small study. Okay, so time for a new polling question here. And this one is, if you are a person with Parkinson's or another condition, have you received LSVT BIG treatment? So this is specific to people with Parkinson's or other related disorders. And just give me a minute to open this poll here. And you should be seeing the poll now. Go ahead and answer it. And again, I'll give you about 30 seconds. Okay, it looks like our numbers are staying pretty stable, and so I'm going to go ahead and share those results with you here. It looks like 62% said no, and 36% said yes, that you have received LSVT BIG. So that's great. We're great that both of you are joining us. I think we all have some new things that we can learn today, whether you have received LSVT BIG in the past or not, or if you're a person that doesn't have Parkinson's and is joining us. That's wonderful too. Okay, so how is LSVT BIG then specifically used to improve function with fine motor tasks? And we'll be walking you through all of the ways in treatment where we really can tackle these issues with fine motor control. I'm going to start off, and in just a few slides, I'll kick it off to Bernie, who's going to be focusing more on the functional training aspects. So the first thing of the LSVT protocol always starts with exercise. And for those of you that have received LSVT BIG in the past, you know that the exercise is intensive and it's really focused on amplitude or the bigness of movement. Now, this doesn't mean just the bigness of movement of your arms or your legs or your posture. It extends all the way down to your hands and fingers. So we're always focusing on big hands, big fingers throughout the whole 60-minute session. And we're hopeful that this will improve your, what we call your kinesthetic awareness of your hand posture and position, so that you can begin to use your hands more actively and more normally in function. What we find typically as clinicians is that many people with Parkinson's hold their hand in more of a closed position than normal, or even sometimes hold their arm in somewhat of a bent position. And certainly this isn't helpful, and it's not a normal position. The second thing after we really work on exercise is transfer to function. So we work on functional task-specific practice, and this could include fine motor activities, which Bernie will go over. What's really critical, just as like in that other study by Van Belgen, is that the person that participates in the therapy continues with home exercise practice, both during the month of treatment and after the month of treatment is done, to really sustain those effects. We'll also assign you daily carryover assignments, which Bernie will explain a little bit further in this webinar. The mode of LSVT BIG treatment is intensive and high effort. So it's always delivered 4 times a week for 4 weeks. They're 1-hour individual therapy sessions. They're one-on-one with your therapist. They're not in a group setting. After you have gone through the full protocol, you might engage in group exercise with others who have gone through the same treatment program, but the treatment itself is an individual treatment setting. Therapists can be found in all different types of practice settings. Many of them work in an outpatient setting, but many of them work in skilled nursing facilities, for home health agencies, and even in hospitals. And so bear that in mind as you're trying to locate a therapist who's right for you. You'll receive daily homework practice that's required all 30 days of the month, and daily carryover exercises. And the whole point of this is not only to improve your function, restore your function, but then help you to maintain it over time so that you develop a lifelong habit of practice and possibly slow the symptom progression in Parkinson's disease. This is a snapshot of the 60-minute LSVT BIG treatment session, in case you're not familiar. On the left side, you'll see maximal daily exercises. Those are those really large amplitude exercises that we work on for your whole body, all the way down to your fingers. On the right side, you'll see functional component tasks, hierarchy tasks, and walking big. And those things are very systematically tailored to you. So your functional component tasks and hierarchy tasks will not be the same as your friend who has Parkinson's. They're all very individualized according to what you need and what you desire. The goal for our patients is that they will learn to use their bigger, more normal movements more automatically in everyday life. And we very much expect that there'll be long-term carryover of increased amplitude use through continued daily practice on your own. This is a slide that shows snapshots of all of the LSVT BIG maximal daily exercises. And perhaps you recognize Jenny from the LSVT BIG Homework Helper DVDs. She's one of our faculty and therapists who is the model on the LSVT BIG Homework Helper DVDs. So one thing, just going back to that slide, that you might notice, although the screen might be small, is that in all of these positions, if you zoom in on Jenny's hands, her hands are open, her fingers are extended and spread apart throughout each exercise. And that's one thing we'll kind of zone into today as well. The purpose of these exercises for you as a person with Parkinson's is to learn the right amount of effort to produce movement that's more normal. So not too small, not too big, in that just right zone. We want you to learn how to override bradykinesia and hypokinesia. Those are those symptoms of small movement and slow movement specific to Parkinson's disease. Our goal is to improve or restore your function to more normal levels. It's intensive because we know that that's the way to drive brain change or neuroplasticity. We want to make permanent changes in the brain. Through the exercises, you'll also have improved coordination of your large muscles and your small muscles, improved balance, strength, flexibility, and functional endurance, as a few examples. So here's a favorite picture of mine. This is actually a woman that went through LSVT BIG, and she's on going to be featured on our new blog in our success stories. But you can see her nice, beautiful big hands that she has learned to really activate and use. So the way that we specifically activate these big hands in LSVT BIG is a couple ways. One, there are a couple of exercises where a person has to sustain a position for a hold time of 10 seconds. And we really focus on sustaining that big hand posture for that entire sustained hold. But throughout the other exercises, whether it be the stepping exercises, the rocking exercises, or even big walking, we continue to focus on that big hand posture to help the person become more aware of a more natural hand position. We also engage in something called hand flicks to really help to activate the fingers and hands. And so I'm going to show you a video of this. Now, bear in mind that this video might be choppy on your end because of your own internet speed, Wi-Fi speed, and to some extent my Wi-Fi speed as well. But hopefully you'll kind of get a gist of what these flicks are.
So first we'll start with the hand flicks. And you see a close-up here of Jenny doing hand flicks. And really pay attention to how she has her entire hand flick open. The second way to do flicks is to do an arm flick. Now you'll see a close-up of Jenny doing the arm flicks. And in addition to the fingers, we've added the movement of the arm to add some additional amplitude. Now watch as Jenny adds flicks to the floor to ceiling exercise. So we have our big to the floor, up, and in the sustained position, she flicks her fingers open 10 times, keeping that big posture, but flicking big with the fingers, and then ending big.
Okay, so hopefully you were able to catch enough of that to understand what hand flicks are. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bernie.
Sounds good. Thank you, Laura. Greetings, everyone. Wasn't that an awesome technique for that high effort and the big, small movements in action? It really comes alive. But we are a team dedicated to reducing the effects of Parkinson's disease in your life. And so as that team, we recognize the great value and importance of exercise in treating the underlying mechanisms of Parkinson's disease that Laura has been talking about that cause those small movements to get even smaller. It's important to make that connection, though, to everyday function to really cement those improvements, translating those lessons from exercise into true functional activity that's important to you. So with LSVT BIG treatment sessions, we work to learn those maximal daily exercises and the big movement techniques such as the high effort flicking, and then to link these movements into everyday activities that are salient or important to you, such as handwriting and buttoning for fine motor coordination. We recognize from our work with Parkinson's patients that exercise, as important as it is, can't stand alone and must be linked consistently with your therapist's guidance into those everyday tasks that are most important to you. This link will motivate you further to continue that important exercise foundation that will be a part of your life in managing your disease effectively. Next slide, please. So we recognize everyone has their own priorities and their own problem areas that need this exercise to task connection. Someone who has trouble putting their socks and shoes on and off They have to translate the trunk flexion and the big reaching from their seated maximal daily exercise into rolling that sock open big and wide, and then reaching down big for the floor in order to start and complete this task in a reasonable amount of time. Likewise, that big trunk bending and the big reaching of the exercise sets will translate into getting up and down from a low couch or even from a restaurant booth or from a seat, any seat really, easily and safely by increasing the size of the movements into big movements and learning to focus the effort that is needed in order to move big. Well, what about the smaller functional links pictured here? We've got a kind of an array of different activities that may be important. The same principle applies to those smaller movements. You just have to move big in order to move small. So just as we talked about in the flicking exercises in the video just a few minutes ago, that same high effort and big movements, they prepare you to fasten your buttons and your zippers, to adjust your collars and cuffs, to put on jewelry and makeup, and even cut roses from your lovely garden like this lovely lady is doing. If you have a garden, if you have a lovely roses like this one does. So remember, taking exercise further into everyday activities is absolutely necessary to move bigger and more efficiently all of the time beyond exercise, whether it's for fine motor tasks or even for bigger movements such as walking. Next slide, please, Laura. So it truly is all about function. It's about working with your therapist on making these links in order to establish that foundation for bigger movement. And it is truly the foundation of the LSVT BIG program as well. Next slide, please. So the LSVT BIG treatment session that Laura showed you a few moments ago, it truly is multifaceted. So now we're going to look at the right side of the screen a little bit more. You can clearly see that link within the treatment session to everyday tasks, from the exercises on the left to the treatment to the everyday functional activities on the right. And these are split into something known as functional component tasks, hierarchy tasks, and walking big. So let's spend some time understanding some of the ways that your LSVT BIG certified therapist can assist you in making the translation from exercise to everyday. Next slide, please. So what is a functional component task? It sounds like a mouthful. This is actually a one-step movement that could be such as flicking a light switch up and down or picking up a coin, something that's rather common. And sometimes it's a piece of a bigger movement, such as getting dressed. You'll work with your therapist to identify what are those everyday issues really important to you related to Parkinson's disease that you'd like to work on. And you'd set up 5 of these simple movements to repeat every day, 5 times each. So that repetition is truly key. Repeating these movements in a big way every day will help to make that connection for you and assure that you're moving big in everyday tasks, big or small. It's important to note that these tasks really don't change throughout those 4 weeks of treatment. Your therapist will work with you for sure, though, to add some challenges and complexity to make sure that the learning sticks in all circumstances. For example, you might be practicing some of these functional component activities with some weight or in different settings or with different textures. It's also important to note that sit to stand, which is very important to many of our patients, is always on this list simply because it's so important in so many aspects of your daily life, from everyday self-care, toileting, all the way up to community activities. It does require lots and lots of repetition in order to get it right. Next slide, please. So here are some examples of functional components, but zeroing in today on those difficult fine motor or smaller everyday movements, we want to zero in on that in order to add that mental sticky note to your day using these functional components. For example, pulling a zipper up and down, or opening a medication bottle, or using a key to turn a lock, and buckling a watch or buckling a belt are excellent everyday activities that may just apply to your particular situation. Again, this is a determination that you make together with your LSVT BIG certified physical or occupational therapist, and they work with you to make sure, to assure that it's challenging and that you're making the connection. So we want to take a few minutes to show you a video in the next slide that makes that connection between the effort and the exercise and successful buttoning.
Good. And I want you to just kind of notice as you're watching Bob do these buttons, it's a very slow, small kind of movement that he's using to try and get those buttons through the buttonhole. And this can be a very frustrating thing for a lot of people, Bob. You're not alone in that. Does the top button tend to be one of the hardest ones for you? Okay, okay. Good, you got it though. All right. Let's do it. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Go again. Really push it in hard. Nice.
About a third of the time.
You're right. You're right. Good job. Now go back in and close it like you're in with it. Really push it in strong. Nice. How fast was that?
Even quicker.
Even quicker. You're right.
I haven't done a button that quick, and I don't know how long.
Good, good.
That's a great, wonderful video. I love seeing that over and over about the effort, and we know that that's one of those most frustrating kind of tasks. So that's a great video. Hopefully you were able to see and appreciate it fully. But let's turn to hierarchy tasks. So this is another part of the LSVT BIG treatment session that you would have with your LSVT BIG certified therapist. Hierarchy tasks are a little different than the functional components. These are everyday activities, but they're a lot more involved. They're more complex, and they're definitely longer. So because of this, once you work with your therapist to choose this long-range goal, you'll work on this with your therapist every session during the next 4 weeks, so that you'll have 16 visits with them. It's a lot of repetition again, but a lot because there's so much time that needs to be taken to get this right. Your therapist will spend some time with you during the evaluation session to help identify what goal is most important for you, or what focus, whether it's work, self-care, or a leisure activity, something you want to move more efficiently and normally. These hierarchy tasks, they really have to resonate with you. They've got to be so important, and you've got to have that emotional significance to you and be a motivator for change and application to other parts of your life that also require the same big effort and quality of movements. So just as with functional component options, these may be focused on fine motor skills, not just on bigger things. Next slide, please. So here's some examples of fine motor coordination specific hierarchies. Just examples for you to consider, not a comprehensive list. But for example, a dressing hierarchy. This could include all the aspects of getting dressed that would require use of small movements, such as buttoning and zipping and buckling buckles. They would all require that fine hand use as well as efficiency, and thinking about this too, about the speed of movement. How many times, if you have Parkinson's disease, does your Parkinson's really slow you down and really affect how you make some decisions about whether to participate in something out in the community or not, because it simply takes too long to get dressed or even undressed. Cooking hierarchy is another example that might be specific to fine motor coordination. So that would include preparing and serving the entire meal, but you can imagine breaking down such a task would also include having to open containers easily and grasping whisks and manipulating whisks in a back and forth way, handling a ladle, a large ladle which might be weighted with heavy soup or stew, serving spoons that you might need, as well as handling a knife or a paring knife safely and efficiently for simply preparing and chopping the vegetables and fruits that you might need as part of your cooking activity. A handwriting hierarchy would and could require lengthier writing ability, such as, let's say, for entering checkbook entries legibly, for completing all the calculations that are in your checkbook, and also to write out the checks and staying on the lines and large enough to be able to read without the bank or a vendor rejecting your check. Donning your jewelry might include working on all the fine movements that you would need to use to insert and fasten your earrings, or for fastening clasps on your necklaces. And you might be able to work your way down to using fine neck chains and handling one-handed clasps and fasteners, such as when you're putting on your watch on one hand, on one wrist, or a bracelet. Applying and touching up makeup hierarchies might focus on opening those mascara wands and twisting lipstick tubes and unscrewing foundation powder containers and handling utensils such as small brushes or bigger brushes, daubers, and then even that mascara wand right close to your eye and being able to steady it and use it effectively. Tying shoes hierarchies are so much more than just a one-step functional component. This requires working on variations such as different shoes, different shoe ties, using a shoe horn, adjusting the fit of your shoes and ties based on sock thickness, and even swelling that might be present in your feet. And nail clipping hierarchy might require breakdown of kind of a breakdown of the positioning that you might need in order to effectively clip your nails, whether it's fingers or toes. Practicing with different size clippers and with different tools from different angles, and even working with an emery board to file down some rough edges with those difficult reciprocal movements back and forth. There are many more possibilities, but I think you can see that moving big while making small movements can be a challenge that requires this kind of deep dive over the period of 4 weeks. Next slide, please. So another part of the LSVT BIG treatment session focuses on setting you up with a carryover assignment, one for every day of the treatment month. This is a lot, isn't it? But again, requiring that repetition in order to really cement the changes that need to happen and the learning that needs to take place. This assigned activity is very personalized to you, and it's set up together with your therapist and focuses on those unique sensory issues that can cause a person with Parkinson's disease to move smaller and smaller and smaller. And just as with any other part of the treatment protocol, there's a clear progression in difficulty and even in the length of time that you might spend over the period of 4 weeks, so that these carryover tasks may be longer as you go along. And the feedback and observation of the results is really key in cementing the changes and effort that's needed in order to move bigger and more efficiently. Here's an example, in the next slide, there's an example of a carryover assignment sequence over a period of 4 weeks. So in week 1, you might open your pill bottle big, and you might want to see if you can get it open a little bit more easily and quickly. By week 2, you're starting to button your whole shirt, and you're thinking big, and you might even time yourself, trying to bring the time, the efficiency, and bring the length of time down. By week 3, you might be writing a short note to someone, thinking big while you're writing, and you're trying to keep your letters big, and certainly you want that excellent feedback from your friend to say, oh, I was able to read that, and look how much better that looked. I can't believe how much better you're writing. And then by week 4, you'd like to be thinking big while you're getting dressed and you're going through the whole process, including the buckling and the buttoning and the zipping that we've been talking about. And you might have your spouse time you, and then also your spouse is going to give you that wonderful feedback. Say, I can't believe how quickly you're getting dressed. And it's because you're really focusing on what you're doing and using that big effort in every aspect of getting dressed. Next slide, please. So we do want to touch on something else that occurs with LSVT BIG. There's something we call an untrained improvement that we've seen happen with our LSVT BIG treatment patients. Often after 4 weeks of training and working with their therapists, we've found that our patients' handwriting skills have improved, even if they were not using functional components that focused on fine coordination, or even in their hierarchy training. And this is amazing. Why is that? Well, we know that in training the exercises, those maximal daily exercises and the functional tasks, that we're teaching our patients the effort required to move bigger, and we're giving them the feedback that they need in order to overcome some of those sensory changes and to generalize this different way of moving. So therefore, this larger and more legible handwriting, as we've seen in this before and after shot on this page, is entirely possible. So this patient wrote a list of issues and concerns that they had with their therapist on the first day of treatment, and that's on the left. And then they rewrote them on the last day of treatment on the right side. And what a significant difference that is. But this is a patient who was not working on their handwriting per se in any aspect of their care. It simply was what we call an untrained effect. Next slide, please. So we also have an example for you of handwriting changes that occurred in a person with Parkinson's disease. And this patient also had something different. He had some underlying cognitive changes as a result of the Parkinson's disease. So he had some memory changes, some thinking changes. But yet, in spite of this, the changes were really possible. So this particular patient was 85, and he was at a moderately advanced stage of Parkinson's disease, which is Hoehn-Yahr stage 3. He did walk without a cane or a walker, but he had those severe memory and thinking changes, as well as he had a severe tremor that did affect his ability to write clearly. So on the next slide, this is a standardized test that has been captured here. The results have been captured, and they show us some more about the changes to handwriting using LSVT BIG approaches. So this is actually part, the standardized test that's captured here is actually part of the physical performance test that your therapist might do with you. And this part of the test, the process is to write the sentence, whales live in the blue ocean. And it's a timed portion of the test. So the top sentence took just over 9 seconds to write, and truly it is illegible, and nobody can read that, even unless you knew what it said, and even then you can't tell. So this patient rushed through his handwriting, and he was very frustrated with his illegibility. And he had that significant tremor that affected his hand control. It was also present. So the second sentence was completed at a final evaluation or reassessment after 4 weeks of LSVT BIG treatment, and it was completed without any cues to be big or for any of his task pacing. So our patient was able to write in this fashion to the point where at least if you knew what it said, you could make it out. And this time took 38. This time it took 38 seconds. So it actually took longer, didn't it? From 9 seconds to 38 seconds. So what's that? What's the significance of that? It showed that our patient was now carrying over some of that task pacing from some of his treatment sessions in order to get good quality and big movements for all sorts of functional activities, even in spite of his memory changes. And I think that's very, very significant, truly. All right, so on the next slide, this same patient, he completed a list of problems, just as what we were looking at a few slides ago, of his problems on the first session. He started to write them out again, got very frustrated with it, and kind of trailed off. And then on the right side, his therapist actually read off a list of the issues that he had come up with on his first session, and he wrote them down. This is after 4 weeks of LSVT BIG. So you can see what a significant difference. His therapist did give him a single cue. And what was that cue? She said, big, write big. That's all she had to say. And with that single cue, in spite of his memory problems, he was able to write his list legibly. So we did want to show you some of these examples of handwriting improvements. Next slide, please. So our team of LSVT BIG therapists across the country, and that's not just the faculty, this is also therapists who we've trained, thousands and thousands of therapists, have reported and shared some real success stories that are just inspiring about their patients' improvements in fine motor tasks, everyday fine motor tasks after 4 weeks of LSVT BIG treatment. And so here's just a few of these stories and examples. So patients were once again able to complete things like piano playing and guitar playing, and think of all the nuances and difficulty and the repetition and the reciprocal type of movements that are needed for that. They were able to turn pages in a book more easily. They were able to shuffle and deal cards and be able to play card games in the community, again, without any difficulty. They were able to get their money in and out of a wallet. Very, very important for most of us. They were able to count change for customers. If they were waiting on customers, they were able to return to an employment situation where they were able to handle money again as needed, or even in, let's say, a community setting, if they were doing some sort of volunteer work. They were able to rummage through their purses, big purses, little purses. Women, you out there, you know how it is. In any size purse, you have to be able to find something in there, of course. So they were able to find those items and do it efficiently. And they were able to pick up sewing needles and pins as needed. So there are so many more examples, and our body of knowledge does continue to grow and increase as the number of LSVT BIG certified therapists continues to grow and grow. Next slide, please. So we do see the future is bright with more and more prospective controlled studies And that's what's really needed. We don't need just stories. We need the studies to really cement the change that we see, and kind of point to the reasons that are going on here. Looking at the effect of LSVT BIG on fine motor movements for both trained and untrained everyday tasks. And we also see future research focusing on a better understanding and even some quantification of how fine motor activity impairments can really affect our quality of life. I mean, it's like implied, but how many things do you let go when you're not able to fish change out of your pocket, or when you're not able to easily, button your clothes in order to step out the door, or even button up your jacket when you're going in and out of a theater or a community event of some sort. So how does it affect people's quality of life? And how does it change when we do have a strategy and a tool in order to be able to participate more fully in everyday activities? So next slide, please. In summary, fine motor control difficulties we know and are very common in Parkinson's disease, and they definitely affect the ability to complete many activities of daily living that are important to you and to us. And there's not a whole lot of research out there related to the effective treatment interventions for those fine motor control issues. LSVT BIG is one of these treatments that may increase independence, speed, quality, and safety of fine motor task use in everyday life. So I'm going to turn this over to Laura now for some information about some other resources.
All right, thank you, Bernie, so much for that nice summary. So some LSVT resources for you. Right now, you're joining what's called a public or a patient webinar that's live, but you might be listening to this later on demand as well. Just please note that on our website, we have a wealth of recorded webinars that we've presented in the past that are available to you for free on a variety of topics. We always have LSVT BIG and LSVT Loud public seminars for patients with Parkinson's and their family or friends that are in conjunction with our live training workshops for therapists. So those are listed on our website under a tab called Patient Resources. That's where you'll find both the seminars and the webinars, and those are free educational opportunities to learn more. Many of you know that we have homework helper DVDs available for purchase and for download. So if you have gone through LSVT BIG, or maybe you're in the middle of going through treatment, these can be extremely helpful in keeping you motivated and helping you and supporting you with your home practice every day. We have new groups called Big for Life and Loud for Life groups, which are exercise groups for people that have already completed LSVT BIG and LSVT Loud treatment. Right now, those Big for Life groups are not listed on our website, but if you're interested in learning if there might be one in your community, please email us at info@lsvtglobal.com. In a minute, I'm going to tell you how to find a clinician, but if you have questions, you can always email info@lsvtglobal.com as well. So in case you're interested in receiving LSVT BIG and really tackling some of those fine motor issues that you're experiencing as a person with Parkinson's, it's easy to find a clinician. Go to our website, which is listed here, select LSVT BIG, and find your country. For you, those of you that are in the United States, this is default. And then the next best thing is to put in your zip code and your search radius. If you have lots of LSVT BIG clinicians that are available in your area and you're wondering maybe where do I start to find someone that can be best to work on my fine motor control issues, we would suggest that you look for an LSVT BIG certified occupational therapist. Because of their training and background, they're the best suited to work on these fine motor control issues. However, if there's no OT available in your area that's certified, you certainly could ask your physical therapist to work on some of those tasks with you as well. And then simply ask for your doctor for referral and send that referral or have it sent to one of those clinicians that you've selected. There are lots of other places where you can learn more about Parkinson's disease and engage with Parkinson's community. In fact, we've listed many of the organizations here some of which we partner with. And so we'd really encourage you to get out there, get involved, and learn more, because there's fabulous support there for everyone. Okay, and so now we're going to open the floor for questions, and thank you for all of those who have already typed in your questions today. I'm really thankful for that. We'll get to as many questions today as we can. Just a reminder, you can type in your question in the question box in the control panel. You can raise your hand, and I know a few of you were raising your hand earlier, and I didn't have time at that moment to get to your question. So if you want to raise your hand again, I will find who has their hand raised. I'll call out your name. I'll unmute your microphone, but make sure that your microphone is unmuted as well so that we can hear you. The third way to ask questions is to email us at info@lsvtglobal.com in case you think of questions later, or if we run out of time to take everyone's questions today. Okay, so with that, I'm going to open up the questions here, and it looks like we have a great many, so that's wonderful. Okay, oh, and there's one question about handouts. I should have mentioned this before. If you're looking for the slide handouts from today's webinar, there is a tab called Handouts in your control panel. If you open that, you can see the webinar handout. You can download it and save it to your computer, or print it, and that'll be the handout of today's slides. Okay, is LSVT BIG practice coaching available in the UK and Scotland? Thank you, Colin, for asking that question. We have clinicians right now in about 43 countries. I know for sure we have some in the UK. I'm not specifically sure about Scotland, but you could go to our clinician search directory and look for a therapist in your area through that. In terms of the treatment being delivered online, you had that question as well. It's a one-on-one in-person treatment, LSVT BIG is. It's not delivered through telehealth or telemedicine. LSVT Loud, which is our parallel speech treatment, does have that ability. So if you want to learn more about that treatment and ability to receive it online, please email us. Okay, Bernie, I'll give you the next question here. How do I combat frozen shoulder when practicing arm and hand flicks? I'm sore.
You're sore. Okay. So the frozen shoulder, you wanna be able to work with it. You should be able to do your hand flicks with your arms at your side, or just as much as your range will allow. The beauty of a lot of our LSVT BIG techniques is that they can be adapted depending on what's going on with you in other ways. We all know as we get older or have different conditions that we have to work around them, but hand flicks are especially simple to do with your arms at your sides. And in fact, I've done that quite a bit with patients in the community who, let's say they need to use some good penmanship in a banking situation or out in the community somewhere. So I say just keep your hands at your side and extend your fingers as forcefully as you can, as though you're shaking off water, and perhaps a little bit from your elbow. So that should be okay, even with the soreness you're describing.
Okay, thank you, Bernie. And thanks, Colin, for your response. I see that you say there's none in Scotland. One thing I should have mentioned to you is that the therapist can get trained online. So if you have a relationship or know of a physical therapist or an occupational therapist that might be keen on getting certified themselves, they can take our LSVT BIG training and certification course and be trained in as little as 2 days. It's about a 12.5-hour course, and then they're good to go. Okay, Bernie, I think maybe one more question for you, and then I know that Bernie has to jump off, but I'll stay on for other questions. This one says, with so many alternative apparatus available, as an example, a tool to assist with buttoning, how does the LSVT therapist continue to motivate the patient to continue with their LSVT BIG exercises?
Well, the thing is, so you're talking about things like a button hook or reachers and whatnot, and I am an occupational therapist, and my experience has been that those are very difficult for a patient to use unless they're moving big, even with using those devices. So devices are not the answer. but moving big with or without the devices is the answer. So that is my professional advice if this is a professional person. And if you're a person with Parkinson's and you're struggling to use a sock aid or something like that, I have lived that dream as well. And really what's needed is some activation and some big movements and high effort in order to really use those adaptations. I hope I'm answering your question, but in my mind, you can't get around using the approaches that we train in LSVT BIG, using the functional components and starting with a foundation of exercise to teach the big effort and overcome some of the sensory changes in Parkinson's disease. The adaptive equipment is not going to cut it.
Okay, thanks, Bernie. Simple question, what does LSVT stand for? That's a very common question, and glad you asked it. It stands for Lee Silverman Voice Treatment. It was named in honor of a woman who really inspired the treatment. She and her family did, and her name was Lee Silverman. And this initially started off purely as a speech treatment. So that's where the voice treatment comes from. LSVT BIG, which is the PT and OT intervention, was developed later as a translation from the speech treatment, which we now call LSVT Loud. Okay, here's one more question. I'm confused with functional tasks. Why wouldn't buttoning and writing and tying shoes be a hierarchy task? Thank you, Charlene. We understand that that's a little confusing too, and with some of these tasks, it's not really black and white. It takes some skill of the therapist to analyze the client really performing those functional skills. For example, buttoning, I'll take that as an example. It could be purely that really the only difficulty is not lining up the button with the buttonhole, and really it's just having enough effort and force to push the button through the hole. It's a very simple task. In that case, it might be more of a functional component task. Tying a shoe could be a hierarchy task. Maybe we find that the whole thing is difficult, putting the shoe on, maybe, you know, tightening up the laces, and then the whole task of making the loops and crossing them and tying them through would be difficult. So not always black and white, and I don't know that it really matters too much terribly, but we're always happy to give you specific guidance if you happen to be a therapist and are wondering whether it should be a functional component or a hierarchy task for your patient. Okay, a few more questions here. I'll be happy to answer these. I do various exercises, swimming, hiking, strengthening, fitness. Can I integrate BIG with exercise I already do to improve tremor that affects writing? So yes, we are complete advocates of exercise, independent in the community, either on your own, like you say, like hiking, or group fitness. There's a number of group fitness opportunities that are specific for Parkinson's, like Tai Chi and dance and boxing. And we really do value those and encourage people to continue to engage in those. But with that said, they don't replace skilled physical therapy, and they don't replace LSVT BIG. Our highest recommendation is that you would receive LSVT BIG per protocol to restore your motion and improve your amplitude throughout all activities, large activities like walking and getting up out of chairs, and fine motor activities as well. And then use what you have learned through amplitude and bigness and incorporate that in the activities that you do. For example, big arm strokes when you're swimming, big posture, big strides, and big arm swings when you're hiking. You know, using your big leg lifts when you get on and off the machine. Maybe you're on the treadmill and you like to walk big. So all of those principles can be incorporated after you receive treatment. In terms of the tremor, I know that was another part of your question. Typically, LSVT BIG is not going to improve your tremor. And in fact, if you exercise, you might find that when you're really exerting yourself, your tremor might increase in intensity temporarily until you cool down again. But we found that with people that have micrographia and tremor, just like in that handwriting example, it's a really bad combination. If we can improve the amplitude part of your handwriting, then the tremor won't be so much of a problem. Your handwriting will maybe be a bit shaky, but still legible. So hopefully that answers that question for you. Let's see if there's any more here. Thank you so much for all of your questions. These are really wonderful to read through. Okay, so this is a question about the visual and auditory cueing study, if the results sustain post-trial. Mandy, I'd have to go back and look at that, but it either wasn't stated or I've forgotten that it wasn't stated how long those treatment effects were lasting, but the reference is there if you want to go ahead and look up that small trial on amplitude of handwriting. All right. I think there's one more question. I think this one might have been from a therapist, and then I will be done for today's webinar. I had trouble explaining how to use BIG with guitar playing. The gentleman was a client, not familiar. He brought his guitar to exercise class, for which I'm a coach, and we trialed BIG. It didn't work. I've used BIG with fine motor tasks such as brushing, teeth, sewing, but just could not translate the BIG to this delicate fine motor task. Please help, as I would like to help him again. And so thank you for writing that question in. Guitar playing obviously is a really complex task. It requires independent use of the fingers. The right hand is doing something different than the left hand, so there's picking and strumming and also moving your fingers up and down the struts. And so even though I'm not a guitar player, I can value the complexity of this. If the problem is an amplitude-based problem, not strumming the guitar strings strongly enough, or not holding down the keys or the strings with enough force or effort with the fingers, those things over time could be helped with LSVT BIG. But if it's more of a problem with coordination or tremor, that would require a fuller trial of treatment. I would recommend at least a trial, a 1-week trial of treatment to see if that could be helpful for him or not. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight in there as well. Best thing to do is try it because you never know. And sometimes, in fact, as clinicians, we've been really surprised at the improvements that people have been able to make. I'm going to leave you with a quote today. Here are some activities which I had avoided, but which are now part of my routine again. And this is from Ralph, a man with Parkinson's disease. Getting up from a low couch, getting in and out of my car, which is low to the ground, putting bills into my wallet, retrieving my cell phone from a pants pocket and putting it back, properly donning a sports jacket and buttoning a shirt, all in 4 weeks. He improved in those activities, and he was very pleased. And so, yes, it is an intensive treatment for 4 weeks, but gosh, that's a big laundry list of functional activities that he was able to improve that improved his quality of life and satisfaction as well. And I believe we have one hand that's raised here before we finish our webinar today. This is Lisa McGowan. I'm going to unmute your microphone if you have a question. And Lisa, if you can hear me, you're self-muted, but go ahead and ask if you can unmute your own microphone.
Just hit that little microphone button. Is that what I do?
Yep, I can hear you now. Try it one more time, Lisa.
How about now?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, so I'm a therapist, a PT, and I have a man, he's in his late 80s, 89, I think. He has atypical Parkinson's, so no resting tremors. He only got diagnosed about a year ago. He's on Cinemat stable dose, 25/100. He has a lot of trouble with his handwriting. He was a jeweler, so that fine motor he really needs. Besides the flicks and the big writing, is that 9-hole peg test, is that what he would use? Or it's just the regular big and loud?
Right. No, so that's just a test to measure his attention. And then he would work on those tasks like handwriting or jewelry-related tasks as part of his LSVT BIG treatment.
Can I use for him, you know, that child's paper where you go up really big to practice? Can he do that? Would that help him at home?
Yes, I have done that with patients, and it does help because it gives them that external target of the boundaries, the lines, to say, you know, I want you to work on hitting the top line and the bottom line with all of your tall letters, and really focus on that. And then during LSVT BIG treatment, the therapist intensively helps to keep them focused on the amplitude, and once they start to drift off, we say stop, you know, pick up your pen, flick your fingers, you know, we try different things, start again. So we don't ever let it trail off and get small. And then we can use that as a hierarchy task to build the length and complexity of their handwriting over 4 weeks.
Okay, thank you very much.
You bet. You bet. Okay, I don't see any other hands raised here. I see just one last question. Thank you for all of your questions. And it says, I'm experiencing heightened soreness in the shoulder and lower back pain since diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. Would LSVT BIG Therapy help ease the condition, or is it aimed primarily at motor function? Great question, and you are not alone. That is very common, especially the lower back pain. There can be many different reasons. It could be posture related due to some posture changes that have occurred since Parkinson's disease. It could be something mechanical that's underlying that coincidentally happened at the same time. It could be related to what's called dystonia. And so the point of telling you this is that it's not a pat and dry answer. Your physician, your neurologist would want to evaluate it, and then your physical therapist should evaluate it as well. If it's related to posture of the Parkinson's disease, causing you to be more flexed, maybe more sedentary than you normally would be, those things we find are really amenable and typically improve greatly through the exercise that is part of the LSVT BIG protocol. A lot of our exercises are focused on big posture, extension of the spine, big movements of the shoulder. But, you know, in summary, a thorough evaluation by your therapist will help to find the cause, and the cause will lead them to the right treatment for you. Okay, so with that, we're well over our time. I really appreciate all the questions today and appreciate that you joined us, took time out of your schedule. This webinar will be recorded and available on our website if you want to refer back to it at some point or share it with a friend of yours. If you have questions at all that we can answer, please email us at info@lsvtglobal.com or contact us or find more information on our website. And with that, we wish you all a fantastic day.